link out. Gonna send this link out. Copy. There we go. So that everybody can get on board here. That's supposed to be Twitter. There we go. Okay. Hashtag Duncan Euro. Tweet. Here we go. So anyway, if you'll give me just a moment, I am sending this out on Remind as we speak. I was on the phone with another teacher and went, oh, hey, it's time to go. Everyone. Okay. There we go. And let me get the Twitter stuff on the screen. Share and broadcast. Alrighty. So, present to everybody. There we go. Now we should be up and running. Fantastic. So, if you are seeing the Twitter screen up on your screen, please let me know. Give me a little shout out so I know I'm not just talking to myself and my computer. Here at the house, let's go see what. Oh, it's just other stuff. All right. So, hashtag Duncan Euro. Fantastic. All right, folks. So, the test tomorrow. I spent a little bit of time tonight taking a look at the different questions and making sure that there wasn't anything that was in there that was too kind of wild or weird, or too far outside of the realm of possibility of getting. And this is what, and I realize we're in different spots because I'm the teacher and I pulled the question. So all that aside, when I'm looking at the test questions and I'm seeing the test questions, what I'm seeing is over and over and over all these big picture ideas that we talked about in class. So like the things that I'm stressing, or the stuff from the study guide, although not exclusively, but they definitely helps. Like the big picture ideas and the stuff that, what is the importance of, when we're talking about the frond and we're talking about the intendant system, why did he implement it? What was the purpose? When I'm looking at these questions, all I see in the answers are just these themes reoccurring over and over and over again. So that's really, what I want you guys to keep in mind. I'm going to say something dangerous here, so don't take me at 100% here, because this isn't going to always work for you. Sometimes you have to actually read the question. But it almost seems like if I'm just reading through the answer choices, I know what the question is going to ask before I read the question, because when I'm looking through some of these questions, right there in bold print is, well, not bold print. They're not bolded on yours. They're bolded on my answer key. But right there in the answer choices is some sort of big picture answer that we talked about from class. So if you're, coming down to the wire, first of all, I would always tell you to go with your gut. Go with what your gut tells you, because you've got a lot of things working there. Subconscious is telling you things that you don't even realize why you're guessing them. But always kind of go with your gut and your first impression. But if you're really struggling, then, take a look and say, which one of these did Ms. Duncan talk about? Now, again, this may not help you 100% of the time. And maybe the question was looking for something a smidge bit different. But I want you guys to kind of get used to finding the patterns of the big picture from class, the major things that make really make these things important, because ultimately I'm teaching them and they're part of the major curriculum because they have kind of like a shaping impact on Europe and where it eventually gets to in modern day. or at least in present day, because technically all of this is modern European history from 1450 on. But how are these events shaping the way things flow to get Europe to the where it is today? So just kind of keep in mind when I'm talking about these big ideas in class, or the main reason why, especially like those claims to fame, like those are the big ideas. Those are the shaping events. So anyway, I've got one tweet here so far. If you could give me a little bit of a heads up here so that I know that there are people with me. Please don't forget that if you don't use Duncan hashtag Euro, I can't see it. If you're just tweeting at me, then I'm not going to see it until I go back into my regular account. So, Miss Megan, before we get into William Laud, I'm going to pull up and see if I can pop it up on my screen here, the review. You will definitely, I put it in it, I wrote the question myself. You will definitely need to go in and tell me, match up the French ministers with either what they did or their, the king that they were a minister for. So you want to make sure you go back over your claim to fame list. Unit 1 test review sheet. You want to make sure you go back in your claim to fame list. You want to make sure that you take a look at who was paired with who. And sometimes the things overlap. I know the two that I usually have to be very careful when I write the questions. The Duke of Sully and Colbert actually did a lot of similar things. Because with Colbert, we're talking about mercantilism. We kind of give him credit for mercantilism. And then they also go in and improve the roads and the infrastructure. Well, Sully improves the roads, improves the canals, improves infrastructure as well. So I have to kind of be careful when I'm writing those questions. I can't remember if there's one of those in this particular test, but just to kind of give you guys a heads up. Let me see. Let's also switch this over so that you guys can see the review sheet as well. Let me see here. Share the screen. Okay, application window. Share the Word. Okay. Alrighty. So hopefully we switched over to the Word document for the test review. And I'm just going to kind of start at the top. Stuart monarchs, especially since we're talking about a power struggle between Parliament and these kings who want to be absolute monarchs, I am definitely going to, kind of pull from that claim to fame. If you look at the claims to fame, it should be pretty obvious that James I is kind of sort of in there, and there are some questions about James, but it really is going to be Charles I with the English Civil War that's going to get a lot of questions. It's going to be James and then William and Mary and the whole Glorious Revolution that's going to get a lot of questions. So those are the ones that you really kind of want to concentrate on. Charles II really doesn't see much action, see many questions. I'm not going to say there won't be any, because then watch there be one, and now I made a liar of myself. We really, I focus on the other two major guys the most, Charles I and James II, because that's when the major events that shape Great Britain, eventually it's Great Britain, right now it's England, that shape England happen, with that power struggle back and forth between, how much can the king get away with, how absolute can he be, and of course we know England is always going to be just a little bit different. There is also, of course, the religion issue, and we spent a lot of time on that, making sure that you know that, hey, these religions, there was a lot of switching around, back and forth throughout this 150, 200-year time span. I am going to ask about, like it says there with number 2, English Civil War, Glorious Revolution. So we'll be getting into some of those details. And again, what were they fighting about? What was the major importance here? And what does the Glorious Revolution finally settle? Which ministers go with which French kings? I told you that. I haven't reviewed the Quizlets here a bit to try to see which ones are on there. So you're just going to have to be ready for the Quizlet. You do want to know what I am the state means. You will be seeing that in its French form tomorrow. And I think we did a good job today talking about Paris is worth a mass, so that you know that Henry IV, sacrifices or puts aside his religion, so that he can settle those French wars of religion, and the country can stop killing, being in basically a civil war over religion, which is definitely a theme in this time period. The wars of religion are finally stopped and settled as we head into this new time period. The 30 Years' War stops them. The Edict of Nantes stops it. Then, of course, the Peace of Westphalia, 30 Years' War, is after the Edict of Nantes. Edict of Nantes only handles and takes care of France, and the Peace of Westphalia and the 30 Years' War then has to be fought because the Holy Roman Empire is still dealing with wars of religion. The Petition of Right is actually in there. And I'll just tell you this. This will be your Twitter exclusive. You may want to take a look at the Act of Toleration and just kind of have a general idea of what that is. And then I'm kind of counting that as one of your extra credit questions, one of those ones that I think are going to be a little bit more difficult for you because we haven't necessarily talked about it in detail in class or whatever the case may be. There are about 3 questions, and not everybody's going to get these 3 because it's random. I had plenty of questions to randomize with this time. So, you're getting 40 questions tomorrow, but it's pulling from like a pool of 75 questions, well, maybe 60. Not so great at the math, right? Maybe around 60. So there's going to be a lot of mixing of the questions, as well as the fact that you guys are all, hoping and praying for a curve. So hopefully that'll keep everything above board tomorrow. But that religious toleration business back in the notes. We talked today about Louis XIV's religious policy and how he thinks, it's one king, one law, one faith, and he revokes the Edict of Nantes, and really kind of what that ends up doing for his country, why he did it to kind of solidify everyone under one religion so he could have unity. Then, of course, you guys did a good job talking about the economic backlash. And how he uses the Palace of Versailles. I think I just left one, there's a multiple choice question about that, but I really feel like we're good on that because of the short answer last week. What is the Parlement and who abolishes it is definitely a question on the test. Comparing English government versus Louis's government with France. Each country had its own style. And hopefully by now you realize Louis XIV was absolute divine right, where in England it's more of a constitutional monarchy, a limited monarchy where they have to follow some rules, and the process of what we're looking at in England in this time period is deciding whether or not they're going to have that and how much power they're going to have. But then it's finally settled with the English Bill of Rights that, there's a little bit of restriction placed when they bring the Stuarts back. But then after that glorious revolution, it is finally settled that, hey, the kings are not going to have 100% absolute power. That's just not the way it's going to go. And of course, that is established. If you look at the next bullet point, that, what's the word I'm looking for? Expectation has been set well before these Stuart Kings come along, and with the Magna Carta, etc. How would you describe religious policies from Henry VIII all the way through Anne Stuart? That goes back to that Reformation line that we talked about in class and we saw in class, moving around back and forth. What is the Fronde? And, so what is the Fronde? Basically, why did it come into existence? So you need to know the intendant system and that whole JV versus varsity description. And then how eventually do they control the frondeurs and the nobility? And of course, there's all the Palace of Versailles stuff, but also, nobles of the row, what was their role, etc. What is Richelieu famous for? That goes back to 30 Years' War, but also, his, and there really isn't, I left the 30 Years' War since we've already done it. I left a lot of those 30 Years' War questions out because we've had that on the last test. So when I'm not going to, again, promise you won't get any, but with Richelieu, I'm more focused on this test, how he implements the intendant system and how he kind of sets the stage for the rebellions of the Fronde and what Mazarin has to deal with. So what are the importance of all of this stuff? I went ahead and put on here because I think it's still, the question is still in there. I don't think I took it out. I didn't want to delete it because it's still a good question. We just haven't had a chance to do the activity that talks about Thomas Hobbes and William Laud. I haven't forgot about your question, Megan. So I kind of just gave you a heads up here that Thomas Hobbes is this guy who believes that monarchs should rule because they have to rule the people because people are so naturally wicked and selfish that they couldn't rule for themselves. And what we're going to get into is we're heading into the age of democracy when people start to think, hey, there are such things as natural rights, and maybe we shouldn't let these kings do just whatever it is that they want. And so this Thomas Hobbes guy comes along, and he believes in divine right of kings, which sounds like, how can he do that? But it isn't. But he also he believes that that people and the king should rule because you couldn't have a democracy if people were making decisions. They'd just do things all for themselves and be selfish. So they're just too wicked to make these decisions. So if you know that, then hopefully that will also help you get one of, again, those additional extra credit questions tomorrow. Hopefully you're using your claims to fame charts in order to study. And let's go back over to the Twitter page. Let's stop sharing this and pop back over to the Twitter page so that screen share. Yeah, I know. I want to share the screen. Thank you. So I can see what questions you guys have. Is that the one I want? Yeah, Twitter. Share the Twitter screen. Perfect. And I gotta go back to Twitter. Where it is? There it is. Okay. So I have some new stuff, and we'll start back down here with Megan and William Laud because she has been waiting patiently. Hey, Matt. Glad you're in the house. Woohoo. Okay. So William Laud, he is the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the number 2 position, number 1 in the church, but the number 2 position as far as power structure in England, because of course the monarch is the number 1. And oh goodness, your Princeton review book does a good job, and I should actually go and look it up before I try to attempt to explain this, of talking about what it means when it says he's an Armenian. And I don't want to talk about it without looking at it because I always have to refresh my memory on this every year. But essentially, he is going to be Charles I's Archbishop, who is kind of on the idea that kings should rule absolutely, and he believes in divine right and monarchy and absolute rule. But then he sneaks in this thing that the king is and the church should have a relationship that's like a marriage, that they make decisions together. Well, no kidding, William Laud. You're the head of the church. So he's this guy that is siding with Charles I, saying, hey, absolute divine right monarchy, man. I'm all about it because I think we're going to make decisions together. And so that puts him on the side against those Puritans for lots of reasons. And it goes back to the Armenian business again. It goes back to he doesn't believe in predestination. He's not doing much. He's acknowledging that Catholicism is still Christianity. Where the Puritans and the Calvinists are all like, oh my gosh, they're the Antichrist. There's no way, no to Catholicism, or the anti-religion. So he's automatically, because of his beliefs and the power he's trying to take over in the government, going to be against the Puritans. They don't like him at all. And so he loses his head before Megan the First. I'm looking at Megan asking the question. Before Charles loses his head. And I don't think I put any questions on the test about him tomorrow. I don't think I did. sitting here with my memory, which again, me and my brain, never a good thing. But I don't think there's any questions about him tomorrow. And I would say just because we haven't had a chance to talk about him, but just it's also really just because they weren't in the pool of questions that I was pulling from for the test. So I think you guys are safe on William Lawn, especially if you know what I just said about him. Also, what is Louis the 15th's claim to fame? Okay, so there were 3 things on Louis the 15th. Hey, Tyler's in the house. Hey, Tyler. What you doing? Hope you're having a great night. So here's what we want to make sure we know, Miss Megan. The war was the 7 Years' War, which is AKA the French and Indian War. And it's a loss, a huge loss for Louis XIV. He's defeated, and it cost a lot of money. And so France goes further into debt, so he's got to try to recoup those losses. And when he's trying to do things to recoup losses, like make nobility pay taxes, etc., the judges, the Parlement, the judicial branch is kind of trying to circumvent his authority, go around it, say no. So he's like, fine, I'm going to abolish you. So he's the one that abolishes the Parlement. Then his third claim to fame is his famous mistress, Madame Pompadour, because she kind of talked him into getting into the 7 Years' War. Even after she's not his mistress anymore, she has lots and lots of power. And she's the one that's going to be introducing these ideas of enlightenment into France and to, talking about them at court. And enlightenment ideas, that's the next unit, actually. After we get done doing the Eastern stuff, it'll be the last thing we do before Christmas. Is just the idea that people have rights, this rise of democracy, or at least really what looks like a democracy, more constitutionalism. They're actually going to start heading towards what England has. England just got there faster. It looks, how do we compare England? I think we're good on that. If not, go ahead and retweet it again if you don't feel comfortable with that whole compare English and French government. That's just talking about what is government like in England versus what is government like in with Louis XIV. So that's absolute monarchy Louis versus in England they have this expectation of a limited monarchy. And I talked about who dismissed the Parlement. So I think we're good there. What exactly did Parlement do? Okay, I can't get too much different or too many specifics here, but Parlement, okay, the French one. Now, I'm not saying parliament, and I will actually just say parliament. That's how I say it in my head, by the way, so I can keep that I in there and spell it. Parliament, English parliament is their judicial branch. It's the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and they make the laws. Parlement, the French, that first word there on the screen, parlement, not parliament, parlement. So parley, M-E-N-T, P-A-R-L-E-M-E-N-T. I'm trying to be clear, and I think I'm making it worse. Parlement, the French version, is the judges and the judicial branch in France. And the way is, this will get easier when we talk about the French Revolution too, because we're going to be talking about the Estates General in depth when we get into the French Revolution. And the Estates General is the French legislative branch. So Parliament in England, Estates General in France, Congress in America. If you want to go for a little bit of extra brownie points, it's the Duma in Russia and the Reichstag in Germany, Prussia. More Germany than Prussia, but we'll go with it. Those are all the governing bodies, the law-making bodies. Parlement are the judges. Okay. I also have a mental block on the 4 Stuart Kings. Amen, brother. Amen. I know the order and some basic stuff, but I forget. Okay. Can I do one major thing? Okay. So I'm going to make this easy for you. James I starts the whole deal with, I want to be an absolute monarch. His son continues it, English Civil War. Because they're like, oh, no, you didn't. So Charles I is the guy who loses his head. That is, and if you remember, oh, wait, how does he lose his head? Oh, yeah, there's a war. Maybe that'll help get that one. So Charles I loses his head. James I kind of kickstarts absolutism. Charles II, don't worry about him for right now, okay? He's just the guy who comes back. They restore him. He brings back some fun. And other than calling him the Merry Monarch and seeing that Merry Christmas, and then I think of parties and having fun. I mean, other than that, being merry, Merry, there's really not much going on with Charles II, other than he's the Stuart that comes back with the expectation that, hey, you are not going to get to be an absolute divine right ruler. So the other big one is James II. And he's the Glorious Revolution guy, along with William and Mary. So that's the power switch over. James is Catholic. They don't want that. He abdicates, and his daughter and her husband take over. I hope that helps. Okay, we have 6 new results. Okie dokie. The Baroque Artists, no, actually, go ahead and just relax on the Baroque Artists. I know there's at the end all of those people that you listed in there. I left those off this time because I understand. I keep telling you the whole packet is up for grabs, but I didn't do that to you this time. So I think you should be okay. What's going to happen is I put that stuff about all those. It's basically the Dutch Golden Age. This is the heyday of the Dutch. They've got all that money because of the Dutch East India Company, the Dutch East Dutch East Indies Company, and they are cranking out art and kicking butt and taking names as far as the art and culture and all that is going on. So I want to make sure you guys are aware that this is happening. We've talked about Vermeer, which is usually who you get. Sometimes you get that that cow picture by Paulus Potter. Every once in a blue moon. That might be the closest thing to what you're going to see out in. I think it's him. Maybe it's. I hope it's him. All I can remember is the cow picture. That might be something you might actually see, out and about in your life. Possibly, maybe, because it's famous. But what I just want you guys to remember is the Dutch Golden Age is we're in that time period when Vermeer was painting, the girl with the pearl earring and all those ones where he's paints the same room over and over and over again. So this is the Dutch heyday, which hopefully helps you understand why. William of Orange is such a big figure and why they're asking him and Mary to come back to rule England. How did Mazarin deal with the Fronde? It doesn't get too much into detail about that, other than it's the series of rebellions and he obviously the nobles and he are kind of going back and forth, and he's kind of left to deal with these rebellions. But I've never had anything that gets like too specific into what he actually does. Just that he had to deal with them, and that's what kind of sets us up for Louis XIV, and we go straight into Louis XIV. So hey, Christiana's in the house. All right. So I wouldn't get too terribly concerned about that, other than I have a question on there where you have to match you may have to match Mazarin with his 1 year as Louis XIII's minister, and then holding the fort down while Louis XIV grows up. So other than that, really, that's going to be the gist of Mazarin. Okay, so what I want you to know, I think that's Scale. I think that's Shion. What I want you to know with John Hoffa, okay? And actually, there were a bunch of people. Again, I have to applaud you guys. You went above and beyond on this John Hoffa page, or this John Hoffa question. Essentially, this is a guy, I wanted you to remember that Charles storms in to Parliament and is trying to arrest these members of Parliament. So John Hoffa is going to be one of these guys that over the course of this showdown at the hoedown with Parliament and Charles I, that he stands up to the king, and he's, trying to help out, and he eventually gets arrested and killed over it. But ultimately, I just want you guys to remember that the king is overstepping himself here. He is going in and trying to keep Parliament from doing what they're supposed to do because he doesn't want them around. He dismissed them. They wouldn't go back home and dissolve because they're fighting for their right to, sorry, I can't not say party. They're fighting for their right to have power in the government. There is an expectation that the king can't just do whatever. Hey, somebody's only here for the euro. All right. Hi Sherry, how you doing? Jason Lee, I'm glad you exist. Your existence is important to me. All righty. Let's see here. Duke of Sully, that's the guy that's with Henry IV. And he's the one that, believe it or not, before we're calling it mercantilism, he's actually, helping to increase Henry IV's treasury. He's the one that is improving the infrastructure, the roads and the canals, along with a little bit later Colbert. So that's the one I was talking about at the beginning of the review, where I have to write the questions sometimes very I have to pay attention when I'm writing them, because they both are both are controlling imports and exports, but we call it mercantilism when Colbert does it. They're both setting up and improving infrastructure and helping out the country. Henry has to do it. Henry IV and Sully have to do it because it's after a war. And then Louis XIV has to do it because he's spending money like, he's got an endless allowance. Mary and Edward, other than the English Bill of Rights, that's kind of their big one. I'm trying to remember what else was in the Glorious Revolution, clear limits on the monarchy. That's really, if you're going to get a question, what they're going to focus on. There was also, I think, that's where you get into the Act of Toleration. They have their own page in the notes if you want to go and take a look at that. And they actually start the Act of Union. If you look up the Act of Union, there's a crap ton of them. I focused on the one where they bring Scotland into the fold and kind of, morph into Great Britain. And morning classes, I think in the board we wrote 1703. Third period said, Miss Duncan, you're crazy. Your brain's doing you wrong, which, again, I should have realized not to go off my brain. The Act of Union with Queen Anne from the Yellow Sheet says 1707. And I'm not going to ask you the difference between any of that. So it's not going to hold, the year difference is not going to screw up first and second on the test tomorrow. But the Act of Union kind of pulls the country together. So we'll start calling them Great Britain kind of from here on out. Also for the JCC sandwich, what did each one do? Coral, you got to go back over I actually just went through it with, other than Cromwell, I just went through it with Tyler. So hopefully you got that question answered. If not, you'll have to rewind back to where I was talking about that. But take a look at the claim to fame chart, with Stuart James being the first, and Charles and his Civil War, and then Charles II, Mary Monarch, and James II, Catholic, so they go into the Glorious Revolution, and William and Mary. And then, of course, Cromwell, what kind of rule, what kind of leader was he? What was the government like? We called it a commonwealth, but there was something else we called it in class. When we take a look at this one-man rule with the support of his army, make sure you know what that other phrase might be for that. What the heck are the nobles of the realm? They actually don't have anything to do with hereditary placement, Tyler, so I'm glad you're asking. In your crash course, when we were looking at the Edict of Nantes or the revocation of the Edict of Nantes or something it was in the crash course today. I was looking at it while the Socratic seminar was going on, and I was looking up something else. I think it's right before the intendants. The nobles of the robe are going to be members of the bourgeoisie. Now remember, bourgeoisie, they're bourgeoisie. That is a class of people that isn't peasant. They have money, but they can't be nobility because they weren't born noble. You have to be born noble. That's the hereditary part. Okay? So nobles of the sword are born noble. They've been noble, they have noble blood, and they inherit titles and lands. They're the frondeurs, the ones that are causing all the mess. Well, the bourgeoisie are going to be your upper class merchants and folks who've made money, and essentially who the intendant used to be, kind of, sort of. All right? They're these upper class people that are now, Louis XIV needs money. He's got all these people with money, and they want to have a special place in society. They can't be noble because they weren't born into it, and they want to have, they want to wear a fancy sash that says, I'm important. Okay? So Louis XIV lets them buy this title called a noble of the robe. It gives them, again, a fancy schmancy little woohoo, I'm special. So kind of like at the end of the year, or at the end of your high school career, when some people get to wear the fancy stoles, or some people get to wear the fancy cords because they've got the different GPA. They want the fancy, okay? And they buy their way into it. Louis XIV gets the money, they get the special status, and they want that special status because they weren't born nobles. They can't be noble. So it's a win-win for both. That's what the nobles of the robe are. And so take a look. It also talks about them in the crash course. Doesn't John win a moral victory or something? You talk about John Hoffa. I am not the leading expert. The people who actually talked about him today during Socratic seminar in the morning were the leading experts. Because I'm okay. I'm going off the record here. Do not quote me on any of this. Off the record, Duncan, on John Hoffa. It was something along the lines of he stood up to the king and told him no. And then he was on his grounds, and they're like, wait a second. And then somebody backstabs him. He's like, hold on. I told the king no for you. What do you mean you're not going to back me? And then somehow he gets to where they give someone else the ability to make laws on his land or something. And ultimately, he's killed. He's tried and hanged, I think, for going against the king or whatever. And his individual story isn't necessarily terribly important, obviously, because I'm struggling with the point. The bottom line is, I want you to make sure you understand the king is overstepping his bounds when he is jailing or arresting these members of parliament who are just trying to do what they're supposed to do. That's the part. This struggle back and forth between who has power. Does parliament have any? Charles I says no. Parliament says yes. And the whole English Civil War is a struggle over power, along with a little bit of a religious struggle too, because we know it's involving Puritans, etc. Elizabethan settlement. So we saw how with the Tudors, the religion of the country goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And you've got these, Mary comes along and she is, killing people, government officials, not just any old Protestants, but government officials who will not convert back to Catholicism. And when Elizabeth takes over, she's Protestant. And she's actually in kind of a precarious position because as a woman, everybody is challenging her right to rule. Everyone is challenging whether or not she can be the head of the church. Because remember, the monarch of England is the head of the English church. So what she says is, okay, I'm putting a stop to this. I will compromise. You can practice what you want in the privacy of your own home, as long as you recognize I am the queen. And that's what the Elizabethan settlement is. It's the compromise where finally we're not going to run around jailing and killing people for religion. The official religion of England is going to be Protestant. I am Protestant, and it's going to be a Protestant nation. but I'm not going to run around and burn people at the stake or behead them if they're doing things in the privacy of their own home with their own religion. And it was kind of the end-all be-all final decision after they went back and forth and back and forth. And Henry says he's Anglican, but he's really Catholic up there in high church. And in the meantime, low church is kind of morphing into Calvinism and, the Book of Common Prayer, etc., which is why we have Puritans to deal with later. And then Edward comes along and he makes it truly Protestant, but then Mary comes along and it's Catholic. So it's a settle. She finally settles the question. It's a settlement. And that for me is the easiest way to remember it. It is a settlement. She settles the matter. Is it okay to be Catholic or Protestant? Now, of course, there's going to be more questions later. The question comes back up when we get back into the Stuarts. But as far as Elizabeth's reign, she settles it. Whigs and Tories, those are your loyalists to the crown versus the other. And there isn't really too much more to say about that. Take a look back at the crash course because my brain is blanking on the Whigs and who they specifically cover or who they are specifically with or for. But essentially, you got the royalists. The Tories are the ones you're going to want to make sure you remember being loyal to the king and his people. His policies. I don't think there's too much on the test about that. Was it Louis XIV who sold the nobles' titles for money? Yes, nobles of the robe. All right. Crippling France's taxes even more. Yes, he did. He was always about the crippling France's taxes even more in the future for short-term money, or was it someone else? Well, I'm not really sure how getting money from the nobles and who sold nobles titles. I'm not at all sure what you're talking about, Jason. You may have to show me what where you're getting that information. Because when I'm reading it, I'm actually thinking you're talking about nobles of the robe. But here's what essentially you got to remember. Each one of these kings, Louis XIV, Louis XV, and even Louis XVI, who we haven't talked about yet, each one of these Louis increasingly puts France in debt. They're always fighting wars. And a lot of, sometimes they're winning. Mostly in the end, they're going to be losing. Louis XV loses the 7 Years' War. Mia, this is for you. Loses the 7 Years' War, which in England is actually going to be dealing with Austria, and we'll get more into its detail after Thanksgiving and before Christmas. We talk about Austria and a lady named Maria Theresa. She's like the next question in the next section under Austria in the study guide. But it's also called the French and Indian War. The French and Indians did not win the French and Indian War. The colonists and British did. And it cost them a lot of money, which is why they started taxing the colonists more, which of course leads to the American Revolution. And then Louis XVI is going to help the Americans, the colonists, and that's going to cost him money. And all of these crippling decisions and wars and overspending without having really good monetary policy. After Colbert, the monetary policy makers just... we don't even mention... We'll mention one guy's name a little later, but we don't even mention names because it's just the kings are trying to do things and they're hopeless at it. Just increasingly leads France into debt to where it goes bankrupt. And that's what's going to cause the people to be hungry. That's what's going to cause the people to say enough is enough. Oh my gosh, that French Queen Marie Antoinette is spending money like it's water and going out of style. So there's going to be a reckoning when we get to Louis the 16th. When we get back from Christmas, we will start with a French Revolution video that takes you through the whole series of events and all the causes and what kind of like this. Again, it's the build up to just a series of bad economic choices. So if you can give me more information on that, Jason, I will definitely come back to it. But I think I've answered it as best I can right now. What was the 7 Years' War? We just chatted about that, and I've done it a couple times. So if I'm starting to see questions that are repeating, I'm just going to tell you to go back to the beginning because I'm past my half an hour mark. John Thing, Prince Review, what are you doing? Oh, okay. Yay. Awesome. I like it when it makes more sense. Quakers and levelers. That's you got to study. You're studying for a 5 kind of question. Quakers are a religious group and what they believe in. Levelers and diggers. That might be in the Princeton. That might be in the Princeton review for you. But even I have to look it up every year, Tyler. That's how you will notice that the more obscure that things get that I'm talking about, those are the things that you're studying for to get a 5. I'm going to study the stuff that's in the center of the pie, but the farther out in the circle we get, like with these levelers and diggers, etc., means that that's information you need if you're trying to get 75% or better on the AP exam for a 5. Okay? So I'm going to leave that right there, which also should tell you something about the test tomorrow, because I feel like I have to be able to explain every question on the test. All right, I'm glad you're with us, Miss Coral. No problem. Read the titles exemption from nobles, from taxes, or something. Don't remember read it. Okay, sorry. Well, obviously it's not going to be. Here's what you want to make sure you understand. The title, the nobility, part of their special privilege in France when they went from feudalism to manorialism. My dog is like having a hairball moment over there. Sorry if that noise is getting to you guys and it's gross. Miss Gracie, how you doing? Are you okay, baby? Now she's looking at me like, why are you looking at me? Okay, so nobility. Part of that special privileges that they got when they went from feudalism to a centralized government with the king was that there was, again, in France, it was, oh, baby. In France, it was the nobles and the nobility don't have to pay taxes. So that means everybody else has to pay the taxes. Okay? And the phrase, when we get into the French Revolution, is the peasants pay the taxes because the merchant class and the bourgeoisie is like, itty bitty 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 teeny tiny. And if you could see my fingers, I'd be making that little itty bitty teeny tiny symbol. Itty bitty teeny tiny part of the people. Okay? So the bourgeoisie, so to speak. That'll come up again later. Anyway. So the people who are paying the taxes aren't the nobility and the ones who have the money. It's everybody else. Well, that's a major tax burden. So ultimately, if you keep taxing the people who, basically are living on a fixed income and have very little income, and have to pay the nobility's rent and, all this other kind of stuff, eventually you're going to tax the crap out of them. They aren't going to have any money left. All right? Then inflation's going to hit. And so things are going to get really serious in France because they don't change or do anything with the economy. They don't change the system. So when Louis the 15th comes along and he's losing these wars and needing more money, he attempts to tax the nobles. And they're like, oh, heck no. We ain't standing for this. And so he made, I think somebody said they actually got a little bit of money out of him for a little while, and then they nixed that. And I can't confirm nor deny that. But essentially, these nobility, they don't want to pay these taxes, which in the long term hurts people. And if you apply that to, kind of, do I want to do this or not? When the tax burden is on the hardest working and the people with the least amount of money, things can get serious. All right? So the nobles don't get taxed. They don't want to be taxed. Anytime Louis XV does something to try to get them to be taxed, the Parlement, the judges come in and say, no. Well, no joke. Guess what their other name is. They're part of the nobility. They don't want to pay taxes either. So they keep saying no, 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 and getting rid of their tax burden. So anyway, that's what you want to make sure that you kind of hold on to about the nobility and the taxes and the situation in France, because over the 175 years they aren't calling the Estates General, the economy is getting worse and worse and worse and worse. They're fighting more wars, and eventually we'll get to the point where France will be bankrupt. Okay, let's see what we've got. Oh my gosh, Jansenists. That's next unit. Don't have to worry about any Jansenists right now. Was that maybe that was in the practice quiz that I put out there with no, there's a practice quiz that's kind of hanging out right now that doesn't have any access code. You can just go in and practice. We'll worry about those Jansenists later. That's the next unit. You definitely don't have any about that tomorrow. So during the English Restoration, the absolute monarchy was abolished. Yes. The idea that there's going to be an absolute monarchy in England was definitely squashed. Then, of course, James comes along and he's trying to test the boundaries of Catholicism and all that business. And then they just say, no. They do the Glorious Revolution, which is, no bloodshed. It's just a abdication, and William and Mary come in. And again, there's that expectation of the English Bill of Rights that flat out just says no Catholic monarchs, period. So, and then, think about it. Why do we have our Bill of Rights? Because in our Constitution, the Constitution sets up the government and how the government should run. But the Bill of Rights, which was ratified after, I think it took, don't quote me on this either, another year and a half, 2 years to get it to get all the amendments to the Bill of, well, they aren't called amendments, but the Bill of Rights through. Those are the people's protections. The Constitution sets up the government and its structure. The Bill of Rights is the people's protections. It's, again, this list, this document that says, or this list of things that say, these are what the people can expect. These are the rights of the people herein. So, it's why they due process, taxation without representation, and you can't have, soldiers being put in your house, and, right to trial by jury, right to a speedy trial. And then finally, the 10th one is really not necessarily English inspired, but that if it doesn't say if it isn't a right particularly given to the federal government, then the states withhold the right to govern over that. So if it isn't written down and doesn't say it's federal, it's state. But now we're getting too far into civics. But the Bill of Rights is something that says these are the people's protections. So think about it. All of these are basically saying the king cannot have all of that power. There are some things that are so sacred that it's an expectation, and we're writing them down, and we're making the kings sign off on this because we expect these to be upheld for the people. Hopefully that helps. We are way past our 8 o'clock cutoff, and we're at our normal 1 hour for a review. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this, at least as far as the live feed. If you want to tweet some things out, I may check it again before 9 o'clock. But otherwise, I hope you have clarified a few things, and that you guys all do really well on the test tomorrow. We got one more day, folks. All you got to get through is an AP Euro test, and then you can go and not think about school for 9 whole days. All right. Unfortunately, totally fortunately, you do have to put up with your parents and your extended family and grandma and aunties and auntie and uncles and cousins. But we got one more test, folks. One more day to get through, and then we can relax for a little bit. So remember to look at the big picture tomorrow. Remember to think about all the major ideas that we've been talking about in class. And how does this, do these events, how did it shape what was going on in Europe or that particular country at the time? Okay. How does it shape the story? Remember, this is all a big story. It's even in the title of the class. So Best of luck tomorrow, and I will see you in the morning, or some of you, I guess, in the evening.